weeks ago, it seemed we were on the doorsteps of war with Iran. And so we're very lucky to have two internationally renowned experts to talk to us this evening. Ervand is a distinguished professor emeritus of Iranian and Middle Eastern history and politics at Baruch College, a historian of the Middle East specializing in modern Iran. He's also taught at the universities of Oxford, Columbia, New York, and Princeton. In 2011, he was elected to be a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He has published numerous books and papers. His three most recent books are A History of Modern Iran, published in 2008, The Coup, 1953, The CIA and the Roots of Modern U.S. and Iranian Relations in 2013, and The Crowd in Iranian Politics in 2016. Sina is a senior analyst with the National Iranian American Council. In his role, he conducts research and writes on U.S. Iranian relations, Iranian politics, and Middle East policy issues. Previously, he was a research specialist at Princeton University, Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, where he focused on nuclear and security policy issues related to the Middle East. He has published in Newsweek, The National Interest, Huffington Post, the Atlantic Council's Iran Source, Think Progress, and the Washington Quarterly. He has appeared on numerous TV shows, including the BBC World and Al Jazeera English. So let's give them a warm welcome. Would you like to start off tonight?
Thank you. I was asked to speak about the historical background to the present crisis. And as a historian, I take history seriously, but in this situation, history is important only in terms of political culture. I don't think it's really the definitive issue in the politics. But before we get to the real contemporary politics, the event for Iran that has really shaped modern Iranian political culture is the coup of '53. This has created in the Iranian public, you could say culture, a deep trust of the American government, because they know that in '53 a popular prime minister who was really the national leader of Iran, you can call him the Gandhi of Iran, or Nkrumah of Iran, or Mandela of Iran, he had that type of stature, was overthrown by the CIA. There's a lot nowadays about revisionist history, talking about this was actually a myth, the CIA had a role to it. But the new documents that were released actually in 2017 by the State Department showed without any doubt that the CIA was instrumental in carrying out the coup. But this has left, I would say, a deep imprint in the Iranian thinking, popular thinking about the United States, that the United States is, the government is not to be trusted because of what it did in the past. It might even try to do it again. However, this distrust doesn't really explain the recent crisis of the last 20 years. Often Iran bashers will argue, well, Iran is paranoid because of what happened in the past, that's why they can't deal with the United States. This is actually, I think, on a false track, because what it avoids is other real issues that divides the United States and Iran. The leadership in Iran knows, of course, about the '53 coup. They're as influenced as anyone else, but they're quite hard-nosed, realist, pragmatic politicians. They don't make decisions about the president on what had happened in 1953. They know that the United States does not have that ability to carry out the coup of 1953. The United States doesn't have the Shah, doesn't have the army, doesn't have the old upper class that existed in Iran that helped in the coup of 1953. So they know realistically it's a different situation. But there are other major issues, and there you can also see in the behavior of the Iranian elite that they're quite willing to negotiate with the United States when the United States is willing to negotiate. So the problems really don't come from Iran, they come from Washington. To give you a couple of examples, after September 11th, Iran actually reached out to the United States. It helped the United States in the invasion of Afghanistan. It actually offered to make a grand bargain with the United States. At that time, Iran had a reformist President Khatami, who was talking about dialogue of civilizations, not clash of civilizations. He offered a large, actually, document which the Swiss ambassador brought to Washington, basically a grand bargain to settle all the differences between Iran and the United States. The Bush administration, in fact, almost kicked out the Swiss ambassador and said, never again dare you come to Washington with such a proposal. It was Washington that didn't want to negotiate at that time because they were riding high at that time and they thought that they could actually overthrow the Iranian regime at that time, so they weren't interested. So this desire for actually some sort of rapprochement existed in Iran. It was lacking here. Again, when Obama reached out to negotiate, again, Iran was more than eager to negotiate with the nuclear settlement. Here, if you look back, the argument here in the United States was that the pressures, sanctions that was put on Iran forced Iran to negotiate. This is actually a distortion of what happened. Iran was actually willing to negotiate. The changes that occurred were actually in Washington, not in Iran. Before that period, the US was adamant that Iran should have no nuclear program at all. Iran insisted that it had the right, as a basically self-respecting nation, to have a nuclear program. Where the difference came was that Obama, unlike Bush, agreed that it was fine Iran to have a nuclear program as long as it was not a nuclear weapons program, which Iran agreed to. And that was what the settlement was about, a nuclear deal, that Iran would have a nuclear program, but it would be monitored and would have guarantees that it would not become weaponized. And this was exactly what Iran had been talking about for years. It was the Bush administration that had refused to accept it. So you can, in many ways, find that there is a pragmatic side to the Iranian regime. There's a lot of problems with the Iranian regime. You can call it, highly ideological and so on. It does rather unpleasant things in terms of torture, prison, and so on. But when it comes to politics, international politics, it's actually very down to earth and pragmatic, and I would say quite rational in respecting and protecting national interests. But the problem really comes from Washington. And here, we, in the last few weeks, focused a lot, too much, I think, on Bolton, as if Bolton was the real key issue, and that with Bolton gone, somehow the crisis is over. I'm not that optimistic about that, because Bolton was not really the crucial problem with Iran, or the person adamant about about going after Iran. It was much more than that. There are a number of, you could say, advisors, influences in Washington on Trump, on a hard line on Iran, whether it's going to war or not going as far as war, but pushing so far that they think the regime will collapse. That type of intransigent policy, rather than negotiations, is still very much there. Where does this pressure come from? Well, one major pressure, of course, is from Netanyahu, the Likud administration there. They've made it their policy that Iran has to be destroyed. They made no bones about that. They all consider Iran an existential threat to Israel, and the only way you can get rid of an existential threat, of course, is to get rid of that threat. So consequently, there's been constant pressure from the Likud administration on Washington, and this was the main differences between Obama and Netanyahu. In fact, very bitter relationship there, precisely over Iran. And this is exactly why Netanyahu intervened in American politics. We know about Russian intervention, but actually there was more of an Israeli intervention with Netanyahu coming to Congress and attacking the president on the nuclear issue. And that, of course, pressure from Israel still exists. It's very much there. It hasn't disappeared. Another pressure is, of course, from the Saudis. For the Saudis, they've been talking for a long time that Iran is a snake and the United States has to cut off its head. Again, there's been no secret about it. The Saudis have now spent billions of dollars actually on publicity in the United States in pushing their line that Iran is a very mortal threat to the United States. And of course, within the administration itself, there are plenty of people who are adamant that the United States should go after Iran. People like Edelson, who's a close advisor and financier of the Republicans. You also have Giuliani, of course, who's become basically on the payroll of an Iranian fringe group, a sort of sectarian group, the Iranian Mujahideen, receives good funding from them. Probably it might help him in the next divorce he's going through. But here is a new low in American politics where you have actually prominent people receiving money from really a real nutty organization, a real sort of sectarian nut group. Just to give you an example of the nuttiness of the Mujahideen, at one point the leader of the Mujahideen said all Mujahideen members had to divorce their spouses, and if they wanted to get married, he would decide who they would marry. So it's an ultimate in terms of basically cult, a religious cult. Yet these people have a great deal of influence in the present administration. I won't go through the list of number of people in the administration who are close to the Mujahideen. And then there's Pompeo, who now is sort of seen as sort of more of a moderate because he seems to have a conflict with Bolton. But Pompeo has a long history of focusing on Iran. And not long ago, he came up with 12 commandments on Iran. The good Lord had only 10 commandments. 10 commandments are quite hard to keep. But this gentleman came up with 12 commandments. He basically said, we will not negotiate with Iran unless Iran fulfills these 12 commandments. And they're actually outrageous commandments. There's no way that an administration in Iran could meet those 12 commandments. He seems to have changed his tune now because he says now that, oh, we can negotiate without any preconditions. But those things, why did he say those? Why did he make it a commandment of only a year ago? where now he's changed it. So you have, I think, still that pressure in the administration of a very hard line on Iran. Where there might be a nuanced differences, and there may be actually some of the differences between Pompeo, Trump, and Bolton are on personality issues. They have nothing to do with really Iran. But general view has been that, well, with Bolton gone, the pressure on Iran has diminished. There's no longer likely to be a war because here the real hardliner has disappeared. Well, I would say still there are other hardliners still there, and they may not be openly calling for war. What they would be talking about privately is that if you put enough pressure on Iran, especially on sanctions, this will bring the regime down. So you will have a regime change, even if you don't openly call for it, because a hard, basically squeezing of the regime will bring it down. Now, there's some logic in that, but the fallacy in their argument is that this regime is not really a fragile regime that is going to collapse. Yeah, the sanctions are painful, they will hurt people, they will hurt the average citizen, but it's not going to be something that is going to bring down the regime for a number of reasons. One is there'll be enough leakage from China, from Russia, from even Europe. The French are very eager to get some sort of agreement that they will be able to buy goods and invest in Iran. So if relations, especially between US and China, get worse, the Chinese seem to be eager to actually step in. So there's that seepage that is going to help Iran. Secondly, Iran, all the problems with the state of Iran, it is quite an efficient state. During the Iraqi war, when there were economic crises, it had a very efficient way of rationing, actually very much like World War II in England. It was able to ration the goods, basically make sure that people did not starve or there was really not a major crisis. Why? Because it does have an efficient administrative structure. A third reason the regime is not fragile is that there is a strong national identity. Iran is not a state that was created by colonial powers after World War I, like many states in the Middle East. It has, you'll probably know, a 2,000-year history. It has basically, you could say, a very national consciousness, a very in-depth, basically awareness of national identity. The 53 coup has strengthened that, the revolution has strengthened that, the constitutional revolution early in the 20th century strengthened that. These all have created a strong national, I would say, identity. So pressure from outside is not going to unravel the regime. It will probably strengthen the regime, especially the more hardliners in the regime, who will say that because of national honor, we have to stand up and not give in to US pressure. Just a question of national identity. You find often from organizations connected with Israel, they will produce maps of Iran as a mosaic country with old maps where you can see basically Qashqai's, Bakhtiaris, Lurs, Baluchis, Kurds, Turkmens, as if Iran was a clearly composed of many multi-ethnic groups. And from that, of course, then you can say, well, if it's a multi-ethnic society, national identity is weak, and if we put pressure on this, the whole system will unravel. And they talk in those terms. In fact, they encourage the Azerbaijan Republic in the north to encourage Azerbaijani identity in Iran and so on. these are, I think, very much out-of-date perceptions, because what you have seen in Iran very much is a strong, basically, acculturation into Persian culture in the last, especially 40 years, with the expansion of education, eradication of illiteracy, that even people who may identify at home as, let's say, Qashqai or Bakhtiari or Baluchi, they still find themselves as identifying with the national identity. So it's not like other societies, like let's say in Syria, where I think people identify as a Christian or Alawi or Sunni. In Iran, people do identify strongly as Iranian. And you find this even in the Jewish community. So you find this is the idea of somehow this is a fragile state that would be brought down by pressure is basically unrealistic. But people who advise them, of course, the State Department want basically a strong action. This is the type of argument they will use. Another argument that they will use, which feeds into the need for being drastic, is that Iran is a major threat. And basically the way Iran is often identified in the American sort of, not, I would say, the high brow media, but the popular media in the television, is that Iran is an expansionist power. The term is often used hegemonic power. Hegemon means, of course, you have hegemon over other countries. And that Iran is a major threat to the United States, that Iran has its reach all the way to the Mediterranean, to Pakistan, into the Gulf, and therefore is threatening the United States. In fact, in the Pompeo 12 Commandments, his main gripe was Iran had all this supposed influence all over the period, and Iran had to withdraw to its own borders before the United States could negotiate with Iran. Now, again, what they're doing here is the Iraqi scenario, building up Iran as a major threat to world peace, to the United States, and basically as an expansionist power. So you have the notion that modern Iran is like the ancient Achaemenid or Sassanid Empire about to expand and take over the whole of the Middle East. So they talk about basically the Iranian military as a major might. And here you need a reality test. If you actually look at statistics, Iran does not really have a military, even to be a military threat to Iran. If you look at the military budget of Iran, and here the good source is the Swedish Peace Institute that does the solid research on military expenditures. Iran's military expenditures are actually tiny compared to its neighbors. The highest it's had in recent years in military expenditures was last year, was $17 billion. The Saudis spent $97 billion. The small Gulf states spend almost $90 billion. So here you have so-called hegemonic power spends 17 billion versus its neighbors are basically spending 10 times more. So what sort of military threat is this to the region when you're looking at statistics? Usually when military personnel talk about military threat, they want to know how many tanks the guy has, how many airplanes they have, how many ships they have. Iran basically has a national guard, the Pastars, that would be effective on basically on their own territory, but they have no basically outreach power. So the result is basically the complete false image as this state as a military threat, when in fact it actually doesn't have much military clout. Where it has some influence, you could call it even soft influence, is that due not to its own actual prowess or its own power, it's due to mainly what the mistakes the Bush administration did. So the Bush administration created a number of vacuums where Iran has been able to basically fill in rather than actually invade a country. It has been able to get some influence in neighboring countries, but they're mostly thanks to the United States. For instance, before the United States invaded Afghanistan, the Taliban was a major threat to the United States. Iran and the Taliban almost went to war at one time. When the Taliban collapsed and Afghanistan basically divided, Iran got some influence in Afghanistan. And ironically, it used that influence to help the United States in Afghanistan. So at present, Iran, yeah, it has some influence in Afghanistan it didn't have before, but it wasn't due to its expansionism, it was due to Bush's invasion. Similarly, in Iraq, before Saddam Hussein was, of course, the mortal enemy of Iran, when the United States got rid of Saddam Hussein, this created a vacuum in Iraq, and Iran was able to then get some militia in Iraq. These are Iraqi militias who get help, probably money and some assistance from advisors from Iran. So that, yes, there's been influence of Iran in Iraq, but thanks to the United States, not because of some expansionism. Similarly, in Syria, nowadays they claim when Iran has invaded Syria. Well, Iran does have some revolutionary guards there, but why? Well, because its ally, Assad, was being threatened by jihadists. I know in the American press it was the opposition to Assad was portrayed as sort of nice liberal Democrats, like the so-called in Iraq. Most of the opposition in Syria was jihadists. They were divided up into two jihadists, the Caliphate, ISIS, and bin Laden jihadists. But both of them were adamant in going after, not after Assad alone, but after going after the Alawi community and the Christian community. And Assad has survived, in part because it has the support of the Alawis, but also because Iran and Russia came into his support. Again, if the US allies in Syria had not actually pushed against Assad, Iran would not have had that much influence in Syria. It has that influence because actually massive amount of American arms poured into Syria when the revolt started in Syria. The US claims, well, they didn't send those arms, but it was US arms, so whoever sent it would have been Turkey or the Persian Gulf states. And people don't remember when US sells arms to any country, it has to sign an agreement that they are not permitted to sell it to a third party without the permission of the United States. So if suddenly anti-tank weapons appeared in the hands of jihadists in Syria, they were made by the United States, then somehow, whether directly or indirectly, the US must have been implicated in that. And it was at that point, in fact, when the Russia's Air Force directly intervened in Syria, because obviously tanks were very vulnerable to anti-tank missiles that the jihadists had. So here, again, the irony of it is the United States is very upset because Iran supports Assad. Well, so does Russia. Why isn't America so upset about Russia supporting Assad? even more ironic is Israel. If Israel is so worried about Assad, why does Netanyahu actually have photo opportunities with Putin? He's running on this election in Israel on the grounds that he's good friends with both Trump and Putin. But of course, it's Putin who's the main ally of Assad. Iran only plays, I would say, a minor role. So what you're getting is, in fact, a very intense and systematic propaganda about Iran not only being a major military power that is threatening its neighbors, but having this overreach, that it is expanded to other countries, and it has basically a insatiable appetite to build a new Iranian empire from the Mediterranean to the India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And as a result, if you have to buy into that picture, of course, then the logic is that the US has to get involved. The US has to do something to prune to feathers of Iran, because otherwise the whole area is going to be gobbled up by Iran. So what you in the media often get is a lot of, I think, hype and very little basically reality test of what is the strength of Iran, what is its interests, and what does it pose as a threat to the United States. And as I said, since I think the regime is quite pragmatic, and their demands are what they stated basically under the Obama administration, they want to be left alone, they want to trade, and they want to have a nuclear program, and they're willing to actually guarantee that this nuclear program is not a weaponized program. And that was what the Obama deal was about. And that's the only reason that Trump denounced it as the very worst deal ever made was only to cater for Netanyahu's idea that the existence of Iran, with or without nuclear weapons, is an existential threat to Israel. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Professor Abraham. For me, it's really an honor to speak next to the professor. He's one of the leading actual experts in this field. You can really amazing.
Closer.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, much better.
So I'm going to give a brief overview from, I think, a slightly different angle about how we got to this current impasse with Iran and kind of the quest for U.S.-Iran kind of relations over the past 40 years. And I think the most important thing to say up front is that the U.S. and Iran, they both have a long list of grievances against each other. I think on the Iranian side, a lot of it really starts with the 53 coup, as Professor Abahamian mentioned. 25 years of support for the Shah's dictatorship after that. You had, after the revolution, the Iran-Iraq war broke out, and the U.S. really supported Saddam Hussein in that war of aggression against Iran very aggressively, and Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons in that war. It was a very aggressive war. And then since then, we've seen a lot of kind of aggressive policies, sanctions, policies that I think, really have been geared towards regime change inside of Iran. Now, on the U.S. side, I think, the seminal kind of difference with Iran after the revolution was right with the revolution and the hostage crisis. Right? The U.S. diplomats were taken hostage at the Iranian embassy, and then after that, the list of U.S. grievances is kind of Iranian support for groups of the U.S. deemed terrorist organizations in the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, various kind of aspects of Iran's kind of foreign policy and national security policies, its ballistic missile program, its nuclear program, its human rights record. These are the kind of grievances that U.S. officials bring. And I think at the same time, we've seen efforts over the decades at kind of improving relations and kind of bridging the divide between the two countries. But, these have all suffered from a lot of setbacks, a lot of it having to do with the lack of political alignment between kind of leaders on both sides who were simultaneously in power, who really supported negotiations or efforts to kind of improve the relationship. For example, like President Khatami, the President mentioned, his overtures in Afghanistan and supporting the U.S. in Afghanistan after 9/11, that was met with Bush putting Iran in the axis of evil and kind of imposing harsher sanctions on Iran and kind of scuttling European efforts for a nuclear deal at that time. And really, the status quo U.S. policy over the past decades has mostly been a regime change policy. And a policy that's been geared towards not accepting this Iranian government, not engaging and not having diplomatic relations, and trying to really support efforts to topple this government. And I think the one exception that we really had was in Obama's second term. And in Obama's second term, we saw that the U.S. it moved away from these policies of regime change and just pressure for the sake of pressure and pressure aimed towards kind of toppling the government, towards like serious diplomatic engagement. And so the negotiations that led to the nuclear deal in 2015, they were marked by, like, first, each side had a more kind of feasible bottom line. For Iran, it was that it wanted, its rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to a nuclear program, to a nuclear energy program, to enrichment to be recognized for uranium enrichment. For the U.S., that Iran doesn't have a bomb. So there was an avenue and overlap for kind of reaching a deal. So the negotiations that President Obama engaged in were marked by high-level diplomatic dialogue for the first time in decades. You had the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and Secretary of State John Kerry meeting many, many times, lengthy negotiations. And for the first time, we saw these channels of communication being established between the two sides, and at an institutional governmental level. And so, and also the negotiations, they were really marked by kind of mutual respect. The whole tone of the relationship changed. On the Iranian side, where leaders often kind of partake in ceremonies and events where the crowd chants "Death to America," all of a sudden we have Javad Zarif meeting with the Foreign Minister of America. And so in Iran, the negotiations really did break the taboo of kind of negotiations with the U.S., which that has also existed. And in Iran, these hardline forces, much like our own hardliners here who oppose any improvements in the U.S.-Iran relationship, they also oppose any improvement in the U.S.-Iran relationship. And I think the hope really with Obama under the nuclear deal was that this deal could kind of serve as a stepping stone to kind of broader negotiations with Iran and perhaps a path to normalizing U.S.-Iran relations. And Obama talked in a concern, he kind of conveyed this broader strategic aim with the region in terms of, he wanted to foster some kind of strategic equilibrium, is what he called it, or cold peace within the region between Saudi Arabia and Iran and some of these other countries that would be premised on the U.S. kind of engaging Iran and engaging the Saudis and all these other countries, but overall having kind of more withdrawn from the region and kind of engaging everyone and try to kind of work with all these countries. And at the same time, we also had the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. He also gave this very important speech after the nuclear deal was reached during that same period, where he said that the nuclear negotiations and the nuclear deal, this would serve as a kind of criteria for Iran to kind of judge whether it can trust the United States for further negotiations. Because Khamenei's, yes?
Toosi, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Having a little difficulty with the microphone.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I will, no. I'll hold it closer.
Okay.
It goes very high and then disappears.
Oh, okay. I'll just have to
That was
have
very high.
this is very high.
Which is good. Which
This
is
is
good.
good?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, how about I try it without the microphone?
No. You're live. You're live right now. So
Okay.
everything you're doing is going out over the air.
Okay. I'll hold it up to here.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Is that good?
Yes, slow down. Yes.
Oh, okay. I will slow down.
Is that better?
Is this better? Is this,
Sal,
better?
Sal, don't change anything, please.
I think once you speak slower.
Sal, do not change anything. All right. Okay.
So anyway, so after the nuclear deal, during that time, the Iranian Supreme Leader also kind of dangled this prospect of if the deal was properly implemented, and if all sides met their commitments, the U.S. kind of delivered on its promises with sanctions relief, it would serve as a criteria to kind of judge the U.S. in terms of further negotiations, using this as a stepping stone to kind of perhaps a broader kind of overhaul of the relationship. So this was the tone of the rhetoric on both sides in 2015. But at the same time, we saw that both in the U.S. and in Iran, there was ardent opposition to these negotiations and to improving U.S.-Iran relations. In the U.S., as Professor Abrahamian mentioned, a lot of this opposition was kind of pushed by these neoconservative groups that a lot of them have close ties with kind of Israel, kind of Israeli interests, and Netanyahu, along with other kind of U.S. quote-unquote regional allies like the Saudis and the Emiratis, they really viewed kind of any improvement in the U.S.-Iran relationship as coming at their expense. So they view kind of any improvement in the U.S.-Iran relationship that they would stand to lose, and they want the U.S. really to remain in the region, kind of give them carte blanche support like it has, like it's doing right now under the Trump administration. So they really lobbied very heavily against the nuclear deal in the U.S. And we saw that Netanyahu himself in 2015, just as the deal was about to be reached, he went to Congress. He circumvented traditional diplomatic protocol. He didn't notify President Obama. He went and addressed both houses of Congress and criticized the negotiations. So it was a massive lobbying effort against these kind of countries to scuttle this diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran. And in Iran, we also have this more hardline school of thought in Iran that believes that tensions with the West and the U.S. they can't be resolved through diplomacy. Iran should have a more confrontational, assertive kind of position and posture in the region. And they also, a lot of these kind of hardliners in Iran, their kind of power really relies on Iran's diplomatic and economic isolation. And Iran that opens up with the world, that trades with the world, a lot of these very reactionary factions in Iran, they would lose out, especially when the population is largely middle class, largely educated, and wants better ties with the world. So we saw that during the nuclear negotiations, these hardliners in Iran also very strongly attacked President Rouhani, Foreign Minister Zarif, these negotiations, and they really introduced this idea which the Supreme Leader also kind of gave credence to and talked about, that the U.S. with negotiations is seeking soft regime change, that it's seeking regime change by other means, and it's trying to empower certain elements, these reformists within Iran, to topple the system from within. So there was a lot of arrests in Iran during this time. Yeah. Slower? And so there was a lot of arrests in Iran during this time. And then, but ultimately, the deal was reached. It was being implemented for a couple of years. And we saw that Iran did experience economic growth, and Rouhani won the next presidential election in 2017. In the Iranian parliamentary elections after that, the kind of more reformist factions made a lot of gains. And then we come to Trump, who completely reverted U.S. policy towards Iran, 180-degree reversal. And he not only returned to the status quo ante of supporting kind of regime change and imposing all this pressure, but imposing very unprecedented new sanctions. And I think Trump's Iran policy has been motivated by a number of factors. The major ones I think is his top donor was Sheldon Adelson, who is he's the highest donor to the Republican Party, and his one single issue that he himself proclaims that he cares the most about is Israel. And he has a very right-wing interpretation of Israeli interests, and kind of U.S.-Israeli relations, and how the U.S. should support Israel. So he was Trump's biggest donor. He really pushed hard for Trump to leave the nuclear deal. And Sheldon Adelson is someone who's publicly called for a nuclear bomb to be dropped in Iran. FYI, so he's Trump's biggest donor. And then at the same time, we saw that Trump, he was bent on undoing Obama's legacy. He called it the worst deal ever. The nuclear deal was Obama's signature foreign policy achievement. So Trump said this is a horrible deal, and he wants to, presumably, he says he wants to get a better deal. And then we also, the role of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, kind of the lobbying efforts they did in 2016 leading up to the election. There's been a lot of great reporting on this from the New York Times and others. And that is a whole other kind of foreign interference story that doesn't get nearly as much mainstream media coverage as the Russian interference story did. But there was a lot of efforts by these countries to elect Trump and support him and shape his Middle East policy. So Trump, he's engaged in this maximum pressure campaign against Iran, the so-called maximum pressure campaign. And these new sanctions that Trump imposed, these new policies that Trump is pursuing, it's very unprecedented in terms of sanctions same time, we've seen that they've designated the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps as a terrorist organization. And of course, the Revolutionary Guards Corps engages in many problematic activities, both in terms of oppression domestically and in kind of the Middle East and abroad. But they are a state-run military force, and this is the first time the U.S. government has sanctioned the military of another country. And we've also seen sanctions against, at the same time that Trump claims that he wants diplomacy, he sanctioned not only the Iranian supreme leader and his whole entire office, but also foreign minister Zarif, so the would-be negotiator. These kind of sanctions, they really kind of foreclose the possibility for diplomacy and negotiations, and they reflect the real aim, which is regime change and kind of escalating tensions. And, the impact of this maximum pressure campaign that we've seen so far is that Iran, so Pompeo, as the professor said, Pompeo has introduced these demands to Iran, these 12 untenable maximalist kind of preconditions for negotiations. Iran is obviously not come to the negotiating table to talk about those demands, has not accepted those demands, despite the maximum pressure. Iran has not changed its foreign policy. Iran has not collapsed, the regime has not collapsed, obviously. What has happened with the maximum pressure campaign is that the ordinary Iranians are paying the biggest price. So we've seen the economy really shrink and is in deep recession. Inflation, cost of living has gone up, the Iranian currency, the rial, has depreciated significantly, a lot of hardship for ordinary Iranians. But that's really been the only practical impact of that kind of maximum pressure. And actually, another impact that's very important of Trump's maximum pressure campaign is on Iranian domestic politics. So as I said earlier, the hardliners in Iran, they oppose the nuclear negotiations, and they warned at the time that the U.S. can't be trusted. That if you reach an agreement with the U.S., they're not going to live by their commitments. You can't trust these people. But at the time, Rouhani and Zarif, these pragmatic kind of centrist factions in Iran, they created consensus to kind of negotiate the deal and agree to it. But now we've seen with Trump kind of reneging on the deal, imposing all this pressure, the kind of this moderate pragmatic camp in Iran, represented by Zarif and Rouhani, they're the ones that really collapsed. The regime has not collapsed, but this moderate pragmatic faction is the one that's really had its political capital and currency debilitated. And these hardline elements have been greatly empowered domestically. And overall, this school of thought that in Iran that says, we have to confront the United States and we shouldn't negotiate, they're ascendant right now. And overall, this is the kind of the norm for U.S. sanctions policy, not just with respect to Iran, but we've seen with Venezuela, with North Korea, with Cuba. But these kind of sanctions, they amount to collective punishment against an entire population, but they don't change the behavior or actions of the regime, or they actually entrench these regimes, and they just impoverish the population. So it's a very brutal policy for the Iranian people, and it's really eliminating it's weakening the Iranian middle class, eliminating civil society, really withering the chances for peaceful democratic change in Iran. So right now we see past tensions with Iran as a result of this maximum pressure campaign have increased over the past 6 months especially. That really, Trump, he's been driven by John Bolton and Mike Pompeo in his Iran policy, and this is really to blame for the collision course. Like, they put the U.S. and Iran on a collision course. And now Bolton and Pompeo, they are figures who have opposed U.S.-Iran diplomacy in principle for the longest time. Both of them have openly called for military confrontation with Iran, launching war, kind of military strikes against Iran. And Trump, though, on the other hand, he has said he wants a deal. He has said he does not want war. And he really has an opportunity for a war in June when Iran shot down the U.S. drone. And at the time, according to all these reports, even Bolton and them at the time of advising Trump to attack Iran and launch military strikes, and Trump did. And since, I think May was really the inflection point between the U.S. and Iran, because in May was when we saw the U.S. remove these oil waivers that it was giving to 8 countries to continue importing oil. So in May, the U.S. removed those oil waivers and got more serious about trying to reduce Iranian oil exports to zero. And also in May, that's when they designated the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. So what you saw also happen in May is that Iran, even though it remained in the nuclear deal for 1 year after Trump first left in May 2018, this past May, Iran announced that it's going to start leaving the nuclear deal. It's going to gradually, over time, reduce its compliance with the nuclear deal. And then we also saw a certain amount of escalation and kind of actions from Iran within the region. So the Iranian officials, they said many times that if we can't export oil, then no regional country should be expected to export oil. And of course, Iran sits on the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz, which is a very strategic waterway. So you started seeing after May that some of these tankers, Emirati tankers, other countries' tankers, they started being used, there was explosions and they were hit. And then you saw in June that it's when Iran shot down the U.S. drone. It's $200 million kind of state-of-the-art surveillance drone that the Iranians claimed was in their airspace. The U.S. said it was in international airspace, but the Iranians shot that down. And that's when Trump, it seemed like the U.S. was on the verge of military strikes when Trump backed down. And Trump said, the reason I didn't attack is because 150 Iranians were going to die. That's what he said on Twitter, which is obviously not the real reason, I would say. But, so now we've seen a shift, I think, in the past, really like a month or two again, where we've seen that Iran is starting to leave the nuclear deal. They're really building leverage for themselves with their nuclear program, kind of increasing the capacity and kind of the stockpile of uranium, and by leaving the kind of limitations of the deal. But at the same time, all these escalations Iran is engaging in and leaving the nuclear deal, they're limited and they're reversible. And Iranian officials have consistently said that if Europe and these other countries kind of maintain and kind of go back to their commitments under the nuclear deal and provide Iran some level of sanctions relief, then Iran will go back to full compliance with the nuclear deal. So Iran they're escalating as well in response to Trump's maximum pressure, but they're also leaving the window open for diplomacy. So I think, Trump right now, for him, he's pursued all these aggressive policies with Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, but he says he wants a deal. And his whole thing was that, he wants to present himself as the deal maker, and that's what he ran in 2016, also criticizing these endless wars in the Middle East, saying he was opposed to the Iraq war, not wanting to get involved in another major Middle Eastern war. So I think Trump right now, he's on a timetable too, in that, he installed all these very hawkish advisors who got him nowhere in foreign policy, like Bolton and Pompeo. Right now we're a year out from the election, and he needs a foreign policy victory. He needs one of these things to come to fruition, whether talks with North Korea, Iran, he needs a photo op by the Iranian president. So right now we've seen that Trump in the past, just last week, he fired John Bolton. And I think there's a certain amount of reporting that says that the differences over Iran policy were actually one of the main reasons that Bolton was fired. Trump is ready to, he's entertaining, or he wants to offer Iran some level of sanctions relief in exchange for potentially, for sitting down with the Iranians and kind of meeting President Rouhani or having some kind of negotiations between the two sides.
Excuse me, Sina, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Anybody you could talk without the microphone, I think you might.
Sure.
You wanted to stand up.
That doesn't work, and we'll change the mic altogether.
I apologize.
No.
I don't know. I hope you could hear me.
The professor we were able to hear him without the...
Testing. Seems to be fine. I changed the
Testing.
No.
Testing. Is that better?
Yeah, right there by
Is that good?
by your chin. By your chin, I think.
Okay. I hope this is better. Sorry about that. So I think right now, gauging the prospects for actual U.S.-Iran negotiations and where these tensions are going to go right now. So I think Bolton going is a good sign in terms of it diminishes the prospect of a war between the U.S. and Iran. And it increases, depending on who the successor is going to be, it increases the possibility that the Trump administration might shift away from its maximum pressure campaign. Perhaps start kind of getting serious about some sanctions relief to facilitate some kind of negotiations. But that's the key. The key is that this change in personnel right now is not enough. There needs to be a change in policies. So we have to see, over these next couple of weeks, who Bolton's successor is going to be. Now, Trump himself he's kind of said that. So the French right now this kind of, they try to mediate between the US and Iran, and they've introduced this idea of giving a $15 billion credit line to Iran in return for Iran going back into full compliance with the nuclear deal, and as well as for some of these sanctions waivers on oils to be reinstated. So the Iranians have welcomed this proposal, and they said if the proposal does go through, they would return to full compliance with the nuclear deal. But it's looking like this would be some kind of interim arrangement, where Iran would get this kind of sanctions relief of $15 billion, they would return to the nuclear deal, and then they would negotiate with Europe or maybe the US in kind of multilateral setting. It's the only thing the Iranians have said, on a potential broader kind of, maybe potential new negotiations or kind of, I mean, I would say the potential for a sit down between Trump and Rouhani or kind of US-Iran negotiations right now is very remote, still very remote regardless of Trump kind of shifting some of these policies. And I think the main reason for that is that, again, this kind of moderate, pragmatic camp in Iran that was usually the kind of the voice in Tehran that pushed for negotiations with the US, they've been very debilitated, and what's happened is that they themselves have gone kind of more to the right in this respect, in the respect of, you know, eliminating or agreeing that there shouldn't be any negotiations with the US, agreeing on kind of the need for a more confrontational, assertive policy in the region right now. And overall, there's these kind of factions in Iran, they don't have the capital to push for new negotiations right now. Like if Rouhani were to meet Trump at the UN General Assembly like 2 weeks from now, he would be politically destroyed. Like all his allies, it would be a huge political cost for him. So you can't, I think that's very untenable. There's no chance really for bilateral negotiation, but what's needed is that if Trump doles out some sanctions relief right now, that between Iran and the Europeans, Iran can go back to the nuclear deal for some limited period of time. Ideally, as a result of new negotiations, confidence is built between the Iranians and Europeans. And then if Trump offers more substantial sanctions relief, which is what the Iranians are saying the US should go back to compliance with the nuclear deal in exchange, and then the Iranians would be willing to contemplate new talks. So yeah, if Trump if he offers more substantial sanctions relief, then there would be a likelihood, a potential for some kind of new negotiations between the US and Iran. But it's going to require major shifts in Trump's policies towards Iran. Now I think another area where we at the National Iranian American Council, we kind of, in Washington, we advocate a lot for kind of US-Iran diplomacy, we work on the Hill. So one thing we're pushing for a lot right now is for the Democratic candidates right now for the 2020 election, for them to make returning to the nuclear deal as a key part of the foreign policy platform. And so we've been pushing for this heavily since last year, and thankfully right now, practically all of the front runners, with the exception of Cory Booker, they've all openly said that they would return to the nuclear deal if they were elected. So I think that's a very good sign. And if the U.S. does return to the nuclear deal in early 2021, that creates a potential for, and then granted, if Iran also returns to full compliance at that time, then that creates a potential again for perhaps efforts at new negotiations that can build off the nuclear deal. But I think there's a number of other, I just want to let you guys know, there's another number of other efforts right now going on in Congress right now with respect to Iran that are kind of more hopeful. So one is that Representative Ro Khanna from California and Representative Gates from Texas, both a Democrat and Republican, they've introduced an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which this amendment would forbid funding for a war against Iran that Congress does not authorize. It kind of safeguards Congress's war powers authority on the Constitution, which has been greatly undermined by, 2001 AU amendment, basically. So right now, they introduced this amendment to the NDAA bill in the House, and it's on to the Senate. It's not in the Senate version. So we're kind of pushing hard for kind of the Senate version to also include this amendment, and obviously any grassroots efforts and kind of people calling their members would be very helpful in that regard. Also, Representative Barbara Lee from California, she's introduced a resolution in the House calling for a JCPOA return, and it still hasn't gone up for a vote, but it has, I think, over 30 co-sponsors, and that would be, the more members of the House sign up for that and the PASI passes with majority of Democrats on it, that'll also be a very powerful kind of catalyst to kind of hopefully get all Democrats on board with returning to the nuclear deal. And I think that's about it. I want to give like a broad overview of stuff, kind of where we're at and where things might be going. But I think right now, just a few things on kind of Washington's overall Iran policy debate. Like I've been working there about a year, and that I think might be interesting for you all. In Washington, you have within the foreign policy establishments, all these kind of think tanks, these foreign policy groups, and the de facto position is that we have to be in all of these corners of the globe. We have to intervene everywhere. Like our interests are tied to America being everywhere. And there's all these kind of cliches and about certain countries, and Iran is the worst one in this regard in terms of how bad the cliches are and how big the difference between what Iran is actually like and what the reality is. And I think this is what we need to push back from. It's not just the kind of the minutiae of specific Iran policy or kind of the nuclear deal or maximum pressure, but it's the overall kind of view that we have towards the Middle East and kind of towards these countries that really enables a lot of kind of really bad policies. And a lot of it rests on certain kind of mistaken assumptions about, we have these allies in the region that we portray as these kind of moderate allies, the moderate Arab regimes, when in reality, America's kind of footprint in the region rests on supporting all these kind of very brutal dictators, these authoritarian regimes, whether that be Egypt, or Saudi Arabia, or the Emirates. And diplomacy it's not been a diplomacy-driven policy that we've had towards the Middle East. It's been a military-driven policy. And I think we need to start thinking beyond the parameters of the debates that have been set up on all these issues and really start thinking and reimagining what a kind of more pro-diplomacy policy towards the region would look like, what a policy that kind of empowers the regional people, pushes the regional people towards kind of self-determination and kind of democracies and kind of having their more representative governments. And I think the U.S. for the longest time has actually stood an obstruction to that. We've supported these authoritarian regimes, we've given carte blanche support to the Israeli government as it's kind of, it's taken over the West Bank, and now it's moving towards openly annexing them. That's what Netanyahu called for. So I think just as Americans, as kind of grassroots mobilizers, we should really challenge the parameters that have been set up for like acceptable debate towards the Middle East. Well, I'll leave it at that.
All right, we're going to open this up to questions. So I'll hand you the mic, and if you have a question, you raise your hand, and I'll try to mix it up. Men, women, try to speak for less than 2 minutes, and then we'll hand the mic back to our speakers. So.
Thank you so much for coming. Question, if you could give us a little clarity on Iran and the Houthis in Yemen. Thank you.
Iran and Yemen. Well, Yemen has had a very divided history. I mean, it was actually a shotgun wedding between North Yemen and South Yemen after the fall of the Soviet Union. And basically, there have been civil strife in the Yemen for a long time. So Iran was really nothing to do with that. Where now it's, from Pompeo's point of view, Iran is involved, is that the Houthi rebellion is somehow instigated by Iran, which is again a complete falsification. The Houthis were, long before Iran got involved, Houthis were up in arms against basically the southern part of Yemen. We know actually from WikiLeaks that some of the documents that were leaked to the State Department that the Iranian government actually advised the Houthis not to go into Sina, the capital. They were just trying to calm things down. The Houthis took it upon themselves to go in. Since then, with the Saudis more involved, Iran clearly is giving some aid to the Houthis, probably drones. But of course it's actually quite hard to get materials there. But somehow the notion that the Houthis are proxies from Iran and they're doing this at the behest of Iran is completely off the wall. I would say it's an independent revolt that has nothing to do with Iran. But Iran has basically then in the last stages got given some help. And the way often that ideologically explained, well, the Houthis are Zaydis. Zaydis are an offshoot of Shiism, so there's a sort of Shia arc here. But the Zaydis never considered themselves Shia, and the Shias in Iran never considered Zaydis as Shias. So this is sort of an outside imposition of an identity that really did not exist before. The irony of it is actually North Yemen was a stronghold in the past of monarchists, of conservatism, but now it's become much more radical. North Yemen before was supported actually by Israel and the Saudis, and the south was supported by leftists, but the roles were reversed there. So Yemen's very complicated, but it really has nothing to do with Iran.
I'll add a few points on that very quickly as well. I think the important thing when it comes to like the Houthis or kind of Iran's regional allies, this kind of group that's allied with Iran overall, is that there's a lot of hyperbole about that these groups are Iran's kind of puppets or these kind of reflexive groups that are allied to Iran, and Iran is just pulling their strings, like whether that be Hezbollah or these militias in Iraq or the Houthis. And I think the real important point is that these groups, they have their own domestic constituencies. These domestic constituencies, like they represent legitimate grievances of these domestic constituencies, and they have domestic goals. And I think, if the Islamic Republic were to collapse tomorrow, Hezbollah is not going to just disappear. These groups in Iraq or the Houthis. And I think to the extent that they become close allies with Iran is largely, and I think this was mentioned earlier, that these interventions that the U.S. and other countries have done, they push their interests to align with the Iranians. So, for example, with Hezbollah, we saw that their origin had to do with the Israeli kind of invasion of Lebanon in the 80s, and they kind of mobilized the Shia there to kind of create this group. And same with in Yemen right now, is that the U.S. the Saudi intervention has pushed the Houthis to be far closer to Iran than they were just a couple years ago.
I'm sorry, I missed the first beginning, but I think so much history was left out by both of you. Never heard the word imperialism. The word imperialism. The U.S. has been involved in the Mideast since probably World War I, maybe before. I don't know about that. We're talking about, you mentioned Mossadegh. The U.S. CIA boasted about getting rid of him. They boasted about a legally elected guy because he was going to nationalize the oil, or he started to. They boasted about all this. So when you talk about the Shah, and I had friends who came over from Iran in the 60s and 70s because their parents were killed and persecuted by this Shah. And they went back in joy when the Shah was overthrown, and then got killed by this fundamentalist, by this group that took over, because they were financed, a lot of these individual groups were financed by the CIA, by the Israelis, because they figured anything but socialism. We need, or communism. We need the fundamentalists. Allende, all these people all over the world. Neither of you, maybe I missed it, mentioned the axis of evil. When Bush came and mentioned 3 countries and then destroyed Iraq, that was a big impetus to get those weapons of mass destruction in these 2 countries. Not that I'm saying it was a good plan, but the act that he would say this, he said, basically, I don't care who the terrorists were. They were from Saudi Arabia. I don't care where they came from. We're going to invest in these 3 countries. And that was imperialism. That was oil. That was control. We may not need the oil, but whoever controls oil controls the world. world at this point. That may change. The Afghan war, the Iraq war. I mean, Trump, not backing Trump, but they were backed by Democrats. Back to the Vietnam War, every war. That's where they disagree rather. When it comes down to, yeah, they may say this is bad, we shouldn't do it. Everybody voted for Johnson to stop the guy who was going to cause nuclear war and wouldn't increase the Vietnam War, and yet the Vietnam War happened. Imperialism is something that we have to see is endorsed by what we have as a ruling class. Read the Council of Foreign Affairs Relations, their Council of Foreign Affairs thing. I'm sure you guys read it. These guys have been pushing for war in the Mideast since the 90s, openly. They're not shy about it when they talk to each other. And every single politician running for president will go and kneel at their feet. Well, they don't really kneel, they just get money. They go and they talk to them. And this goes to Clinton, to Bush, to Obama. This is what they do. And I just think that to blame it all on Trump and think things are going to change because we get Democrats in there is a complete myth. Imperialism is what we have to stop.
The corporate party.
One can analyze a situation like a coup, which obviously I'm arguing that it was a CIA coup. I didn't get into it. The reason that they disliked Mossad there was because he nationalized oil. You can do that analysis without actually boxing in with a general thing that everything can be explained by one term, imperialism. Because when you get to the nitty-gritty of it, for instance, nowadays, you say Council on Foreign Relations, you'll find very few, I doubt that you'll find anyone in the Council on Foreign Relations that would actually support the Trump policy. So if this is the bastion of imperialism, and Trump is a puppet of imperialism, there should be a chew. Yet, the main critics, actually, foreign policy critics of the Trump administration are the people in Council for Foreign. I don't deal with them, you probably deal more with them. You'll find a very rare person who's a diplomat who would support the present policy.
He backed off all of his policies. When he was running for office, the president. He backed off. He wanted to make friends with Russia. He said we should pull out of all these countries. And when he came in, he didn't really, he was just another face. The people that...
Let's let him answer, and then we'll get the other questions. I'll put you on the staff.
So, I mean, if Trump wants to be friendly with Putin, you explain that with imperialism. If he's not friendly with Putin, that's also explained by imperialism. You can't have it both ways to explain everything in terms of imperialism. You have to look at it concretely at each situation. Does this fit into American foreign policy? Is it dealt with on economic issues, or there are other issues? For instance, I think for the Trump administration's policy towards Iran now, it's not U.S. oil companies want to get back to Iran. Iran would be happy to actually give them concessions. It's not the drive for oil that drives U.S. foreign policy, it's Israel. So that's a political entity. It's not an imperialism explanation. Someone could explain that, well, then I'm anti-Semitic because I'm putting the blame on Israel. But politically, where does the pressure come from? It comes from basically Likud ideas, the Americans who support Likud ideas, that Iran is a threat. And that can't be explained to imperialism unless you say the real core of imperialism resides in Tel Aviv. The heart of capitalism is in Tel Aviv. I mean, that's absurd, sorry.
Washington, not Tel Aviv. And we allow Israel to do what they do.
Okay.
We allow them to do what they do.
All right, we're going to be on a staff. So,
Just very quickly, I would say that the Trump administration's policies towards Iran right now are grossly imperialistic, like very blatantly I mean, I agree with you overall in the U.S. concept of empire and since World War II and spreading all around the world, and it's been very imperialistic in many ways. But right now in Iran, it's naked, blatant imperialism, and trying to kind of blockade this country and eliminate its oil exports and impoverishing the population to, Pompeo even suggested that that Iranians they will starve until they basically submit to our demands. It doesn't get more openly imperialistic than
Look
that.
at NATO encroaching on Russia's borders.
All right.
I mean,
Well, I want to ask a little bit different kind of question. I'm an American living in Berlin, and I'm kind of astounded to hear about the nuclear deal as though we're only U.S. and Iran. There are lots of European countries involved and other countries, and I know that it was considered to be the star for Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the German foreign minister, that he had helped negotiate that, bring people together. And it's debated just as actively there, and not in other countries, but I'm assuming in many others. And I know in Germany, you might recall that Germany didn't enter the Iraq War with its troops, but did allow the bases to be used. But this is even being discussed pretty actively. I'm not saying that the majority will follow it, but a pretty large minority would say Germany should not allow Ramstein to be used for an Iran war, because it doesn't help to just say we're not sending our troops if it's an illegal war. Now, I'm wondering in Washington particularly, is this totally out of the picture? And for us as peace movement, I'd like to hear, first of all, how the other countries are responding to what the U.S. attempt to destroy the nuclear deal, which is important to all of them, and how it would fit into our strategy as progressives and peace activists in the U.S., and even left-wingers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that Europe played a major role in negotiating the deal. They were one of the parties to the agreement, both the European Union, Germany, France, and the UK. And when the Trump administration reneged on the Iran deal and left it, Europe remained very strongly in support of it. And Europe initially promised Iran that they're going to try to make up for the sanctions relief that they're going to lose with the Trump administration kind of reimposing sanctions and try to incentivize Iran to remain in the deal. But what we've seen happen in the past year is that Europe has politically and rhetorically supported the deal. But in practice, they haven't been able to do anything to kind of negate the impact of U.S. sanctions. And that's why Iran has begun to gradually leave the nuclear deal. They're trying to pressure Europe, telling Europe that if you can't buy our, you can't buy our oil, you can't pay for it, and you're not doing trade with us, what are we getting out of the nuclear deal? We're getting nothing. Why should we remain in it? And the Trump administration has threatened secondary sanctions against any European company or country that does business with Iran. So again, to your point, I would argue that is, again, a very bullying, imperialistic policy. They're telling all these countries who they can or cannot deal with or trade with.
Europe is helpless, is what you're saying.
But they've largely been helpless. So right now, they need America's permission to do anything. So Macron's proposal right now for this $15 billion credit line, that is kind of premised on the Trump administration allowing it to happen. So Macron's been meeting with Trump and talking with him and trying to get Trump's approval for giving this $15 billion to Iran in return for Iran going back to the nuclear deal.
You want to answer this too?
Yeah, I mean, this is where economics is important. The dollar is basically the international currency since World War II. And because the dollar is so important, the banks, also American banks have stuff, it's very hard for other countries to trade in violation of whatever the U.S. dictates. But this actually creates a contradiction in imperialism, if we say, because the national interests of Europe, China, Russia can conflict with the United States. So their Trump policy, in fact, in the long run, threatens the dollar. Because the logic of the situation is Europe needs to basically create its own monetary system outside the US system, so that Europeans can trade with whoever they want to. They don't have to have American permission. And this sooner or later will happen. You know, sooner or later there'll be a sort of a new de Gaulle in Europe that will tell it's time for Europe to become independent of American power. And once that happens, of course, countries like Iran will be in a better situation. But at the moment, the American banks do have this stifling control. Where I think Macron is trying to do it, is trying to find basically some sort of leverage. And I suspect what he is also threatening to Washington is if we don't, the Chinese are going to move in. The Chinese have offered something like $300 billion to Iran. And if US-China relations get worse, there's no reason why China won't step in. And actually, basically, Iran will then go into the Chinese orbit of economic orbit, which may not be good for Iran in the long run, but at least it will break the deadlock at the moment. But it does mean the US no longer has that power it had 10, 15 years ago. And the economic system that was set up basically after World War II, which showed American dominance, that's gradually eroded. What is left of that is basically just the control of the American banks. And that may be the last thing we'll see going. But if you look at all the agreements that were made at the end of World War II, it was basically IMF, World Bank, dollar, control of the economic system. Those have all eroded.
Who else would like to be on the stack? So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I'm sorry to go back to Yemen, but the Houthi destruction of the 2 Saudi oil bases, which apparently has destroyed 10% of Saudi's oil, is, people are saying that the Houthis don't have the power to do this, so therefore it has to come from Iran. And we were worrying this morning that this is going to be more food for the people who want a war with Iran. Do you think this may happen?
Well, apparently drones did the damage.
Drones?
Yeah.
Drones
I wouldn't be surprised.
Come from Iran.
Could be probably wrong. But remember, for the last 2 years, the Saudis have been massively bombing citizens in Yemen, whether they're weddings or funerals, there have been mass killings. So tit for tat going off the oil pipeline seems to be a fair way of reacting to the Saudi bombing of civilians. So.
But do you think it will affect American attitudes to Iran?
Who's sorry?
Do you think that this drone attack will affect American attitudes towards Iran?
If they want to. They could use it if they want to. I'm sure if Bolton was still around, he would give this another example. But if they don't want to heat up the situation, they'll basically say it's a Saudi problem. Yeah. But clearly, I don't think the Houthis have the capability of building the drones, so someone is giving it to them. But a lot of actually their weapons were American weapons, which they got in Yemen once they got hold of armories that were provided by the US and Britain over the years. And another thing that actually often the press doesn't mention here, every time a plane leaves Saudi Arabia, goes to Yemen, bombs, whether it's weddings or returns to Saudi Arabia, it is really refurbished, fueled, reset by American technicians. It's not really only a Saudi venture. The US is deeply involved.
And uses their satellites to go where they're going to bomb, US satellites.
That probably, and also basically as I mentioned before, when a country gets weapons from the United States, it has to actually sign an agreement how it's going to use it. So it has to have some sort of an okay from the U.S. to use those planes from Britain and the United
The
States.
United States is very critical who they sell their weapons to.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. And I would use this as an example of state power rather than put it in a larger economic framework of economic imperialism. Imperialism might exist, but that's not the driving force here to explain what's happening.
I would just add that the Houthi strike today, I think, is very significant. It's 500 miles inside Saudi Arabia, very far away from Yemen. And I think it marks a new kind of level in the Yemen war right now. And I think it's also, and I agree that most likely the source of these drones was Iran, and I think that signals a new capability from Iran. Because with Iran, when it comes to, I think a key aspect of kind of the deterrence power that Iran has is its capability to disrupt shipping in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz. But right now, this is directly hitting Saudi Arabia's, their two biggest oil refineries. And the reports I saw that Saudi Arabia's output might be cut in half, like temporarily. Over 10 million barrels a day to 5 million barrels a day. And I think it impact them out of the oil market. Like the oil markets are going to open on Monday. We'll see what happens to the price of oil. But I think, this all raises the cost for Saudi Arabia of its war in Yemen, for Saudi Arabia. It raises the cost for the United States of the policy against Iran, like Iran demonstrating these capabilities. Like if an all-out war were to break out, if Iran can hit these oil refineries, then they'll just hit them extremely hard. The whole oil market would go through the roof. So I think, and the Saudis right now, they've been in a bind in Yemen. This is a war that the Saudis said would take 2 weeks. Mohammed bin Salman, when he launched it in 2015. Right now, 4 years they've been there. Obviously, mass humanitarian catastrophe and starvation and disease and all this stuff. But we've seen that this war was based on an alliance between the Saudis and the Emiratis. Mohammed bin Zayed, the leader of Abu Dhabi. And the Emiratis recently withdrew all their soldiers, rapid withdrawal from Yemen. So their coalition is splitting. And now they've lost this ally. The war hasn't gone anywhere. The Houthis are still very powerful and very entrenched. And now they're hitting their oil refineries. So I think the Saudis are in a bind right now. I think they either have to escalate way more or they're going to have to withdraw potentially from this conflict. So we'll see. I think it's a very significant strike right now.
I know predictions are very difficult. I'm asking this question. What do you think is going to be the relationship if Trump is elected again, the second term? How do you see the relationship before and after, something like that? Because it looks like the Iranians have put a lot of their chips on Trump not being elected, and they're looking more to the Democrats. But what happens if that happens?
Crystal ball.
I think a couple things. So one is that I think for the Iranians, a second term Trump compared to another Republican in the form of like a Pompeo or a Tom Cotton, one of the Republicans coming to power, that's actually preferable. Because Trump ultimately, he does have these instincts where he doesn't want to get involved in a major overseas military conflict, like another major Middle Eastern wars. Whereas a Pompeo or Bolton or Tom Cotton or all these other up-and-coming Republicans or ultra-hots, they do have that. So I think in terms of Republican administration, Trump, a second term, especially if he's changing his personnel and he's changing these policies, potentially with Bolton leaving and maybe offering on some sanctions relief, it could actually be better for Iran. But I think the Iranians, they're not necessarily assuming that it's going to be a Democrat. I think from stuff I read in the Iranian press and a lot of stuff is that the Iranians are preparing for this scenario of this maximum pressure campaign lasting until at least 2024. And they're trying to lean their national budget away from oil. And they're trying to really withstand, be able to kind of really change their economy to be able to kind of last like throughout all of Trump's first term and second term. And right now we see that the Iranian economy is actually stabilized, even though right now it's in a recession. when the U.S. sanctions were being imposed last year, and they were, in different ways, that's when the Iranian economy was really kind of spiraling. We saw the currency depreciate rapidly, but now the economy is largely stabilized. The Iranian currency has hovered at a static rate for the past couple months, and I think they have plans also to be willing to kind of put up with this for a long time and kind of be able to endure it.
It's actually hard to predict about Trump because I think it's a complete incoherence. The conventional wisdom is, well, he doesn't want to get involved in war. That's what he's used for. I use that for re-election. But once he's re-elected, he's not worried about re-election. So another thing may come into mind, which is in American politics, the notion is to be a great president in American history, you have to be a war president, which is dangerous because after all, I think the bottom line why the younger Bush went to war was he wanted to be a war president more successful than his father. Someone should have told him to be a war president, you have to have a successful war. But Trump could easily put it into the trap of saying, well, Iran is for Israel, for Saudi, my friends, my financial backers in Saudi Arabia, Iran has to be removed because I have commitments to them. And a short war, we can destroy Iran, and I'll come out of it as a victorious one. Again, the problem is it may not be a short, victorious war, but I wouldn't put it past him that after a second election, the idea that he's a peaceful president doesn't fit in. Anyway, he doesn't strike me as a peaceful character anyway. Just because he didn't go into the Vietnam War doesn't mean he's basically a pacifist. I'd be happy to send people to war if he thinks he's going to win and go down in history as another FDR or something. And of course, this big hero of American presidents he has pictures of is a war president.
So I got him, and then you, and then one more.
Thanks a lot. It's a very great, excellent lecture. I enjoyed it. A lot of good information. And a lot of things I didn't know, people didn't know here. But I have a basic question. In lieu of what happened in June of 2009 with the Green Revolution, what percentage of the Iranian population would be for reformists? To me, because of the revolution, it seemed like the majority would be for a reform government in Iran. What percentage is actually supportive of the hardliners, especially in what's going on now with all the sanctions? That's my question. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to point out actually Iranian electoral politics is mirror image of the United States electoral politics. If you look at the Iranian electorate, there's a 30%, I would say, evangelical that will support a right-wing populist ultra-nationalist like Ahmadinejad. Then I would say there's more than 50% that's somewhat liberal. But then the question depends on what issues there are at that time. So if there's a possibility of opening up, a normalization, reformers like Khatami actually want, like I think it was 80% of the vote. So it can get a huge, basically, shift. If the situation is that the reformers, liberals, basically can't produce anything, people stay home. And that means that 30% evangelical can get enough to get over 50 to actually gain power. So often people staying home, especially moderates, liberals, is the decisive factor. And that depends very much on politics, international politics.
Yeah, I think, the saying all politics is local, that applies to Iran big time as well. Even when it comes to analyzing Iranian foreign policy, a lot of it comes down to kind of the factional disputes and these factions trying to undermine each other. And these quote-unquote hardliners, these more conservative factions in Iran, they do rely on lower turnout in elections, and this isolation, diplomatic and economic isolation, benefits them in their kind of power structures because they control a lot of unelected power structures. And so for this reason, they try to really undermine prospects of negotiations, and they do actions that kind of are really aimed at kind of disenchanting the typical middle-class supporters like the Green Movement, people who support some of the reformists in Iran. So that might mean at certain junctures they'll arrest people, ban certain kind of social media applications, all this stuff. And one of the principal aims, I think, is really to kind of disenchant the supporters of the moderates and kind of lower turnouts. But I think in terms of U.S. policy, we have a track record and a history of how America kind of imposing pressure and scuttling negotiations has powered hardliners. And that was under Khatami and the transition to Ahmadiyya. He made a lot of overtures to the West. He cooperated over Afghanistan, and he was engaged in these nuclear negotiations at the time with Europe. And at the time, he gave a lot of concessions. He broke Iran's nuclear program, but in return, he really got nothing. And what happened, and his agenda was also kind of sabotaged by the conservatives within Iran, but after Khatami got nowhere for all his concessions, Ahmadinejad won that election. And I think right now we're heading into a very similar scenario where Rouhani and Zarif, they've really been debilitated politically. And their popularity, their kind of approval ratings plummeted big time. And I think for the next Iranian parliamentary election next year, the presidential election the year after that, I think if history is like a prelude, where I expect these kind of conservative factions to make big gains.
All right, so we only have 10 more minutes. I'm going to close out the stack. Does anybody else want to get? I got you next. But any other last people? Okay, I think you're the. Okay, 1, 2, and that will be it.
Could you talk about the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah, and Iran and the Palestinian movement Hamas and Fatah?
Thank you.
With Iran and Hezbollah, Iran and Hamas and Fatah. So with Hezbollah, the origin really goes back again to the 80s when Hezbollah was founded. At the time, Iran had dispatched kind of revolutionary guards and certain advisors and people to Lebanon in the midst of the Israeli invasion, and they kind of played a role in shaping what became Hezbollah and creating it. But ultimately, Hezbollah, like I said earlier, they do represent a constituency in Lebanese politics. They have supporters, they're a member of the Lebanese government right now. In the cabinet of Michel Aoun, president of Lebanon, there's Hezbollah ministers who are in his cabinet. So they are a reality, I would say, in Lebanese politics that goes beyond the Islamic Republic or Iran's kind of intervention or influence in Lebanon. That's there to stay, most likely. And with when it comes to Palestine, kind of as Hamas and stuff, Iran, it's had a historically, since soon after the revolution, a bad relationship with the PLO or Fatah, where initially there was this big kind of Yasser Arafat went to Iran and met with Khomeini, but then during the Iran-Iraq War, actually the PLO supported Saddam Hussein, and they had close ties with Saddam Hussein. And overall, Iran has also opposed the Oslo Accords and kind of these efforts towards a two-state solution, at least towards the end of, they did support these Palestinian rejectionist groups like Hamas. And I think one angle at that was to kind of increase pressure on Israel and kind of prevent Oslo. I think Oslo from the beginning was never, in my opinion, geared towards actually fostering a two-state solution on the Israeli side. But at the time, Iran also supported these Palestinian groups and developed these relationships which were entrenched over the years. These groups had opposed the kind of this Oslo process as well.
Yeah, Iran's relationship with Hamas is, I'm dubious about that. They probably have some relationship, but so do a lot of Gulf states. So I don't know, the US doesn't get upset when Gulf states have relations with Hamas. I don't think there is that strong a relationship between them. Obviously, the relationship with Hezbollah is significant. And that's where U.S. uses the argument that, well, Iran supports terrorist organizations because Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. Actually, there are only two countries in the world who categorize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. It's U.S. and Israel. So it's mostly Hezbollah doesn't describe Hezbollah as Hezbollah has done some terrorist activities, but so have many other states and organizations. But Hezbollah is actually, as he mentioned, Hezbollah is in the government of Lebanon. And if really the U.S. is committed to the Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, then the U.S. should break relations with Lebanon. Here that really the government that has its members, crucial members, are Hezbollah. So obviously, I don't think the U.S. itself uses this label terrorism as a polemical device rather than actually something that they pursue.
All right, last question.
Yes, I think what's confusing about Iran is what's going on in the world right now, and I think that they are imperialists, and they still are. U.S. rulers are still concerned about controlling oil, and I think the situation in Iran is actually quite similar to what they tried to do in Venezuela. Venezuela's off the radar right now. But they wanted to control the oil in Venezuela, and they weren't able to overthrow the government in Venezuela. But they're still trying to do that in Iran. And I think what's confusing is like the Council of Foreign Relations, they don't call themselves imperialists, they call themselves globalists. And that's what really their split is with Trump, is that Trump is very erratic. They don't really know what he's going to do. So far, he's got a lot of bombast, and he hasn't done anything that aggressive, but he may. There is a possibility, like you said. But I think the concern for a lot of people here is that, what can we do that can really help the working class in Iran? That is that the sanctions are a tool against working people. They don't really hurt the people who rule the country. They'll find whatever they need somehow. And I think the thing is we want to stop the U.S. from occupying any country to control oil. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is I think that there is a war, an economic war right now between the U.S. and China. So is it possible that Iran, if they side with China, or because they're drawn to China because of economic reasons, could Iran become a proxy war between the U.S. and China?
I think a couple of things. So I think it's very analogous to Venezuela. The administration's policies towards both countries have been really regime change policy, kind of using sanctions as this collectively punishing tool, this impoverishing the society, and again entrenching the worst elements of these regimes. And we've seen in Iran that the people who are best positioned to circumvent the sanctions, who have the smuggling networks and move goods in and out of the country, are the Revolutionary Guards. Resources are going to amalgamate to them. And the Iranian middle class, which is the ingredient of democratic transition in any country, they're shrinking. And I think this should be held as an alternative to what happened after the nuclear deal, which the nuclear deal was really achieving the opposite if it was properly implemented as it was envisioned, in that Iran, by opening up to the world and trading, and the Iranian economy actually kind of booming, and these people like Rouhani or Zarif kind of being empowered. You know, the Iranian middle class then was on this trajectory towards growing, and civil society was increasing, the securitization of society was going down, was decreasing. I mean, there's domestic battles and all of this stuff, but I think that right now we're seeing that Trump's policies are eliminating its potential for peaceful democratic transition. You know, the Iranian people have had a struggle for democracy and independence for the past century, since the constitutional revolution in the early 20th century. And you know, the two main obstacles in their path have always been foreign intervention and kind of domestic reactionaries. And right now, it's back. It's like, you know, history is repeating itself again. The Iranian people are paying the biggest price for the Trump administration policies right now, but the prospects of peaceful democratic transition in Iran are being greatly diminished by this administration, which claims to care about the Iranian people, and all their rhetoric is talk about the Iranian people, but in reality, they're hurting them the most.
It's ironic that conservatives think that economics is going to actually solve the problem, that if you put economic pressure, somehow people will then revolt in your favor. It doesn't work that way. People under pressure, especially in a nationalistic atmosphere, they become much more intransigent and much more willing to fight. So I would say the neoconservatives and people like Pompeo are much more crude economists rather than more sophisticated analysts. Just putting pressure on any country doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get what you want. It may cause pain, but that pain might actually result in more intransigence rather than bowing down and submitting. And looking at Iranian history, this type of pressures have often reacted in much more basically oppositional forms rather than bottling on.
I'd like to thank the two speakers. It's been very I just have a couple of announcements to make. This Friday, September 20th, there's going to be a climate strike, which is international, and people are going to be gathering in Foley Square at 12 o'clock, and then there'll be a march to the Battery